Good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to be here with us. These three people on my left are the only ones holding you back from your drinks, I believe. So we'll get started almost immediately. On my left, I have Phil Smith, Director of Regulatory Compliance at Booking.com. On Phil's left is Nipa Patel, founder and CEO of Temis. On her left is Ben Anderson, Director of Sales at Quavo. I'll be your host for the evening, Jazz Chandava. I'll start with my introduction, and then I'll pass it on to the rest of my team here. So I'm the founder and managing partner of Strategy Bricks. We are a boutique risk and compliance consulting business. We focus primarily on fintechs and cryptocurrency businesses. Previous to Strategy Bricks, I was the head of compliance at Stripe and AirWallex. And before that, I ran financial crimes for PwC on the West Coast. Phil?
Hi, everyone. Phil Smith from Booking.com, one of the, or the only in-house person on the panel. So if you need any of the real feedback, you can let me know. I'm happy to talk to you after the session as well. I spent most of my career in financial institutions and banking, working in the financial crime compliance areas. Then moved from banking to corporate work. I've worked at a telecom and e-commerce, and now I work for an online travel agent. The big thing that connects all three of those corporates is that each one of those companies has a fintech business, a regulated financial institution within that group. You may not know that. So for Booking.com, we work with our own financial services organization to process payments. It's very nice to meet everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nipa Patel, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Themis. Themis is the first compliance collaboration tool. We're a dual-sided platform. So most of our customers are banks and fintechs or corporations, but basically, if you're a bank getting into the fintech space, we make it much easier to communicate, collaborate, share information between banks and fintechs. We also have another side of our platform where we're a plug-and-play compliance platform. So an easier way just to organize and build governance around policies, marketing material. The one thing that we've done different from all of the compliance tools that you've used, it's not only for compliance officers. It's a tool where you actually have your C-suite, your marketing team, your complaints team, and you do your compliance and risk work. Prior to this, I was an OCC regulator. I was a compliance officer of a bank and of the chief compliance officer of fintech. So as you can see, I put all my pain points I've ever had into this software to create a one-stop shop.
Thanks, Nipa. You guys have been getting a lot of requests about what Nipa and her company does. So my agenda for today and tomorrow is to sit with her and really understand and get some inside dope on what the product really looks like. Really excited to have you here. Ben, if you don't mind giving an introduction.
Yeah, so my name is Ben Anderson. So Quavo, we are focused on the issuer side of fraud and disputes. So again, it's something that continues to grow. And so really working with financial institutions, with credit unions, enterprise banks, with fintechs, and with processors to make it an easier process. It's one that is highly regulated. I'm sure Nipa could tell us all about the government regulation behind it, but really making that a smoother transition, smoother process for our clients, and then increasing and enhancing that cardholder end user experience. Prior to joining Quavo, I was with Bank of America for about 15 years, all within that fraud and dispute space. So started out as a phone agent and eventually was leading multiple teams over the debit and credit spaces. So compliance is something that I've grown up with, but fraud is near and dear to my heart, trying to stop it and trying to get it back once it happens.
Thank you. So I think 20 years of risk and compliance experience, the one thing that all of us have kind of experienced is compliance is always seen as the problem child. So you're trying to break that myth a little bit. Ben, let's begin with you. If you don't mind talking about what does compliance technology look like when you work with your customers, what does technology really look like and what are they thinking about?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is compliance is never the sexy part of the business, right? It's something that if you could get away from it, you would, but it is mandated and regulated. And so it's kind of that dual-edged sword of trying to balance, hey, how are we going to build this? How are we going to stay compliant while not sinking too much money, too much time into it? So we've seen everything, from Excel spreadsheets, trying to stay compliant that way, to in-house builds and spending millions of dollars. And it's one where ultimately, I always joke that it's like when me and my wife bought a house. She got to pick out the flooring, she got to pick out the backsplash. I had to make sure that the garbage got picked up, right? I had to make sure that the backyard got laid correctly. It's not the sexy stuff, but somebody had to do it. And that's unfortunately how a lot of banks look at compliance, is it's almost an afterthought. Whereas if you do it right, it can really be that differentiator for a business.
But do you also feel like over the last, let's say about 10, 12 years, that perception has also been changing from being a checkbox function to, like growth leaders and sales leaders and the leadership teams being very interested in using compliance, as leverage, going in line with the topic of this discussion. Do you see that shift, or do you still feel that customers are still struggling and seeing compliance still as a checkbox exercise?
No, I definitely have seen that shift, right? It's one that I always joke that no one goes to a bank because you offer fraud protection or you offer compliance. Like, you're not lining up to be like, what, you will protect me from fraud happening? No one else is doing that, right? Everybody expects that to be kind of the business as usual. And so it's now banks are looking at how can they differentiate that service? How can they not only stay compliant from a regulatory perspective, but make it a better cardholder experience? Because ultimately the competition is shifting. And so to stay top of wallet, to really be able to focus on your cardholders, it's those little differentiators that are starting to become a lot bigger. And that's where you kind of look at this panel as a whole. It is that diversification of ideas, right? It's not the same old, hey, we've done compliance the same way every time, but it's pulling in somebody with financial background into Booking.com to see, hey, how is that building out, right? It's Nipa's company being able to facilitate that a lot easier. That's where I think the financial industry as a whole is really starting to key in on how do we streamline this process because it's not going away, and how do we make it a benefit.
It's interesting. So Nipa, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add to that. Like, one of the reasons that we built Themis was exactly that point. It was everything is done in a silo. You have fraud here, you have AML here, you have KYC here, and there's just so many different tools that you're using. And as a former compliance officer, I spent probably 60% of my time at chasing data, organizing data, doing all these like little tasks, and not really using the information I had for strategic decisions. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're like, you know what, all the easy stuff that we have to do as compliance officers, let's automate all of that so that we can actually provide more information to our C-suite and say, hey, look what I'm seeing with my complaint volume, with our fraud volume. This is the direction we should be taking. And compliance should be more of a strategic role than just a check-the-box role.
So I think to piggyback on that last point, having played CCO twice in my previous life, one thing that I observed at my level was when CCOs see information, the information has been stitched together in some form. Somebody patched it together, somebody's bonus was on the line, so they were able to get the sanctions data and the AML and the fraud data and the SARS, and somehow magically, because that's the same information that then goes to the boards and makes like the CCO's life a little bit easier. What kind of challenges do you face when you're talking to your customers in terms of is that the solution that the CCOs are really looking for, or do you feel like it's the level below that gets more attracted, or to solutions like what you're putting out there?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, like most compliance people, and probably at the companies you work at, you're probably using Excel spreadsheets because they're easier. Like, you'll look at compliance tools and you'll think, these are so over-engineered. I need to do something so simple, like let me just do it on Google Sheets or on spreadsheets. So one of the struggles that we had, they're like, wait, our spreadsheet's better. Yes, it's archaic, but we need stuff fast. It's easier to share. So what we did was, we're like, all right, what tools are you already using? And we just built APIs into those tools. So if you're using Jira or you're using SharePoint, it integrates with Themis. And it provides you kind of that holistic view so that you don't have an Excel that's going in. It's one version control. But I think the barrier to adoption for most technology is how do we take our legacy data and put that in? And so the only way is kind of what we did. We're like, hey, if you want to upload a spreadsheet into Themis, you can do that and move your data in literally seconds, or integrate with these integrations. And we integrate with a lot of the tools that your company's probably already using, but I think that's what, when you're building technology, you have to think about, like, what are they already using? They can't just start a new software from scratch. You have to see, let's take what they're doing already and connect to it.
So what's the one biggest challenge you run into when you're trying to convince customers over?
Convince customers? You know what's really funny? It's very easy to convince like the COO, the CEO. It's actually the hardest is to convince the compliance officer. And a lot of the reason is because I've spent so much time building all these hodgepodge of tools, like building out their spreadsheet for the last 6 months, building out their Monday board for like the 6 months, and they're like, oh man, we just put in like 2 years of work and we presented this, and now you're gonna like take all the work we did and throw it away. So it's not like, I mean, they end up like using Themis at some point once they see the value prop. But I think that's the biggest barrier is like just, hey, we have the legacy data, how do we move it into the tool? And that's kind of what we focused on, the communication and integration part, where we doubled down on.
That sounds like job security 101. Okay, cool. So moving on to Phil, you've had a pretty rich and a dense background going from, tier 1 banking to fintechs. Over the last 10, 15 years, how have you seen compliance technology evolve from the in-house? You're also the only one who has a real compliance job here.
Yeah, well, when he was talking about the spreadsheets, I was like thinking, oh yeah, to get back on my spreadsheet after this. No, I think technology and compliance technology has evolved in, I now work for a technology company, right? And when I was in banking, it was a lot about what is going to be the back end. What's the back-end tooling that a compliance officer, a fraud officer, anyone could be working with that may or may not necessarily speak to the products and services that are the two-legged customer is going to be using. Now that I work for a technology company, really having compliance by design is incredibly important. Having compliance officers being able to work with the business before a new product is putting out there. So, the previous keynote presentation on generative AI was really interesting to me because my products, Booking.com, my sister brand Pricelines and Kayak use generative AI for customers who go on their websites and use it. And we as a company look to build our compliance tools integrated into those generative AI products or other types of tooling that our customers can use. Instead of having a separate software that can go in the back end, we're trying to attach some of our tools and monitoring and testing onto the front end software and the user experience, have that integrated. Because if you're going to be having a separate technology suite, certainly there's needs for case management and managing a workload. But when it comes to having these bespoke technology tools, especially the tools at Booking.com and the products at Booking.com are going to be different than Google or Expedia's. And so we really want to make sure that we're speaking to the products that we provide and that we have compliance officers who are understanding of the technology of the products. Then we could speak the same language with our engineers and have technology be used and connected to those products and services.
That's an interesting perspective. So a little bit maybe off topic. When you meet someone like Nipa or Ben as solution providers solving specific problems, what kind of attributes are you looking for in a solution that get you excited?
Yeah, I mean, Nipa said something really interesting. Is that we're not trying to solve or create a new technology. We're trying to understand what compliance officers, people internally are using, whether that's SharePoint, Jira, the other types of tools internally, and then connect through API, right? Because I've worked at 3 different corporates and in financial institutions. They've all used different internal tooling, and to be able to, and you're going to have back office central tech who's going to be supporting that tooling as well. You want to get their teams to be able to support as well. Oh, it's just an API, I don't have to do much work on it? Great, right? You're going to maintain the API? Great, right? Those are buzzwords that get me excited when I says, okay, if their tooling can integrate with what we have internally, there's not going to be a lot of maintenance going on, and I get a value add that could perhaps replace me trying to go to a consulting firm and bring in a person who can do the work from a technology solution. That's going to be a winner for me, right? I think being able to integrate to the current tooling is really important.
And just for the record, consultants do have children. They need to use that. So please
and do value adds. Yeah.
All right. So Nipa, back to you. Your experience of transformation when it comes to traditional, conventional compliance technologies. versus something like what you guys are building, which the industry has probably not seen before. What's your experience been? How has the industry moved on in the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think everything's just more collaborative now. And I think that's what, to be honest, like when I was pitching this to VCs when I started, every VC was like, how didn't someone not build this already? And I was like, I don't know. Like it was just, hey, like every compliance tool is just like, hey, compliance person use it. Compliance person's the only one that sees it. There's no way our marketing person would use this. There's no way that our complaints person would use it. I think building something that's collaborative, because if you look at compliance, like everything that compliance does, it's, hey, I need to review our marketing material from our marketing team. Hey, I need this legal document. Hey, I need our policies from finance, from credit. It's all, everything we're doing is collaborative. So it just made sense to build something more collaborative. So I think that's what resonated well. They're like, oh, wow, like we never thought about compliance being on the same platform as the rest of the company. So if you think about like what we really are, we're Monday.com, Jira, Airtable, Excel, with a hybrid of governance, risk, and compliance. Like
that's interesting. So again, a little bit of a segue. We've been hearing a lot of consortium-based solutions being out there. Any thoughts, perspectives on why they could not work, or pros and cons, anything that comes to your mind?
I used to work at a blockchain company, and it was a consortium of banks, all the largest banks. It was a company called R3. They did blockchain technology. It was a consortium of 40 of the largest banks. We talked about this earlier. The consortium model sounds awesome. Like, why not share data? Why not share fraud information? And there's tools that whoever has the market share could probably do that. And maybe this is a question to you. Like, I have no idea why no consortium works out.
So I've never seen like a consortium. So again, conceptually as an idea, I think it's great in a utopian society. If a consortium, by definition would work, it being a two-way street. So if I'm using it and I'm contributing back to the data set, I think it's going to work like a charm. I just feel that the way the economies of solutions are modeled and the interests are pivoted, it's very hard for a consortium type solution to be built out where the whole industry is contributing and then feeding off of the consortium. Banks have actually tried this pretty aggressively back in 2010 and onwards. This is tier one banks, Credit Suisse, JP Morgan, HSBC, Citibank tried to come together to build a KYC utility in a consortium where one bank onboards a customer, both on the commercial and the retail side. The other bank could use, passporting abilities. On paper, it sounds phenomenal, but as private industries coming together, at some point, the interests of different players at different levels are very different. Would I want to consume this if I am a tier one bank? The answer is yes. Would I want to contribute that information back? Probably not. So I think for a consortium to work, it has to be two-way. And I can imagine a consortium being built by a Visa, MasterCard, and Amex, for sure. There are only three players, very similar interests, very similar interchange fees. Of course, they're not equal companies, but they can go and solidify their own monopolies and the rails that they have. But to say that from a RegTech perspective, a consortium can be built, if it gets built, I'd be super happy.
Well, isn't Zelle kind of a consortium?
It's working pretty well.
Zelle Pay.
It seems like it's working pretty well. I mean,
it has fraud, but.
Right. All right, Ben, any thoughts on the evolution of technology that you've seen with your customers over the last couple of years?
Yeah, no, I think kind of even piggybacking on that consortium topic, right? It's how do we get the data into the hands of those people that are going to use it, right? We were talking earlier about how fraud is so quickly happening. It is, driving forces, but it happens fast. And one of the biggest issues that a lot of clients run into is just getting the data and knowing how to be able to compete against that fraud. And so it is that data sharing. So, with our clients, one of the big things has been, how do you get us data back quickly so that we can ingest that data and make changes as necessary to be able to fight that. And again, similar to NEPA, right? It's that API, that ability to integrate and to share. I think those are some of the things we've started to see, right? we've seen traditional AI models, which are glorified rule sets and bases that you can build out against, but now exploring that generative AI and how do we securely test and how do we securely make sure, hey, what are we putting out there? Because one of the things that we've seen is there are biases built into them. There are different things that, while they're powerful, while they're very much here to stay, we want to ensure that we're not taking that kind of blind eye approach of, well, the box told me to do it, so I've got to do what the box said, right? It's how do we take this technology and utilize it, make it faster, and then get it back in the hands of those people that are really going to help drive those decisions. And I remember being a kid when debit cards came out, thinking that's never going to take hold, right? And I remember when Zelle came out, and like, how is that better than the debit card, right? RTP is out now. We have FedNow that is driving its pilot. So the industry continues to evolve. It's how are we continuing to stay up to date with it? How are we making sure that we're getting ahead of some of those decisions and not, to Nipa's point, we're introducing something without those kind of compliance aspects hammered out. What are we doing to stay ahead of that? Because once it's out in the open, it's really hard to claw it back.
That's interesting. So I think an important caveat for most product folks out there building AI machine learning-based technologies for compliance, I think on the financial crimes, AML side, explainability of the technology and the algo is insanely important. The OCC has a bunch of guidances out there under which you have to do model validation. You have to explain exactly how a model worked on a certain day with a certain input. And machine learning AI makes a bunch of those caveats very complex and difficult, and that's why the adoption rates have been significantly lower. On the fraud side, we've seen significant positive impacts in terms of the solutions being more effective, the efficacies being higher, and the false positive reductions having significant changes. So when you're thinking of building out some of these solutions to parse out and think about if you're focused more on the fraud side, risk side, makes a lot more sense. On the financial crime side, you might have to do a little bit of hand-holding of both the CCOs as well as the regulators. We have last few minutes left. Nipa, any thoughts on when you go back to your customers and they tell you, yeah, we've got this covered, we can build it ourselves instead of buying it from you?
Yeah, that happens 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone wants to
Great
build
idea.
this internally. Yeah, I have no idea why anyone wants to build a compliance tool internally. Like, it makes no sense. I'm like, don't you want to focus on sales or something that brings in like more revenue or whatever? But I think a lot of them are like, oh, well, like when they see it, they're like, oh, well, we should have thought about this. We're going to build it internally. Every single customer, wait 6 months, they always come back to us. And they're like, actually, we started building it, but then no one realizes like the maintenance. And I would never know that either. I would probably say if I worked in-house again at a bank, I would say, no, we're going to build this. This is so easy. Now that I am a founder of a software company, building technology is hard.
Oh.
There's just so much maintenance, security, privacy. So like, why do you want to hire a bunch of developers to do it when and our software is not even that like super expensive to break the bank, but it's just like, why wouldn't you just buy technology that probably costs like the same as like probably one headcount or whatever, and just buy it, have someone else maintain it. The good thing that we do, and this is probably one of the reasons why banks just really like using us, our entire roadmap is client-driven. So because we are still like agile, we're smaller, like anything our customers want, it's already basically on our roadmap in the next like 3 months. So they really feel like it's a community-built software, and it's not just like a plug and play where we don't know who it is. Like, we really created a community vibe there. So.
Got it. So I think to close out the discussion, if we had a crystal ball, in the next 5 to 10 years, what's the one risk compliance prediction, Ben, you can make now, which you are pretty bullish on?
Oh, fraud is never going to go away. As much as we try to prevent it, and that is our ultimate goal, is to stop as much as possible, it is always going to be there. And so how do you kind of balance it out to prevent it, but also fight it once it gets through is kind of that two-prong approach that clients need to take.
So faster payments, newer methods.
Oh, yeah.
Newer methods of fraud and faster fraud.
Absolutely.
Okay. Nipa?
I mean, I think we've been actually toying with AI a lot, with generative AI, and like how we can put it into our software to say like, hey, this is our type of company. What are the regulations? What are the controls we should have? I mean, to be honest, we've tried it, but the data is just not there yet. You really need to teach it, and I hope it gets better. But
you're bullish that over the next couple of years, the data sets are going to be
I think so, with the right training and with the right data sets, but not now for compliance.
Phil, last golden words.
I think that the continued conflict between regulation, like privacy, and the need or the willingness or want for mass data in order to conduct anti-fraud, anti-money laundering work is going to continue to headbutt and not lead to a clear way forward.
Got it. Thank you. With that, we are at the end of our discussion. Thank you, everybody.